Hey, this is Matt Doommaster. I'm here to talk to you today about a build for the Barbarian in Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls. And I call the build the Boulderlanche. It's an update of boulder toss builds that become popular in the post-patch 2.0 world. And like all boulder toss builds, the point is to build up Fury and then expend that Fury into the boulder toss rune of Ancient Spear, which does additional damage based on how much Fury you have remaining. So basically it's a nuke build, and it's a ranged nuke build, so it gives you a lot of versatility, particularly when dealing with bosses. The bosses in Reaper of Souls can be a little bit problematic for melee because they have so many attacks that are hard to avoid at melee range. So basically the build, well, the skills here. Weapon Throw and Ancient Spear are your two main attacks. Weapon Throw, since we want to generate Fury all the time, we're going to go with Balanced Weapon Rune. Pretty obvious, generates more Fury with each attack. Ancient Spear, of course, we're going with Boulder Toss. That gives you 20% weapon damage for every point of Fury expended once you use Ancient Spear. So, of course, you're going to be wanting your Fury to be maxed out when you use Ancient Spear. You don't want to be using it all the time. Unless you have some, very easy to kill opponent who's just nipping at your heels and you want to get rid of them. Now for our action bar skills, Ground Stomp, we're going with Foot of the Mountain because it generates 30 Fury. Pretty simple. Gives you a little defensiveness, but mainly we're looking for the Fury generation. Avalanche is an interesting one. This is a new skill for Reaper of Souls. And it brings down a bunch of rocks on an area, does a fair amount of damage. In this case we're going with Lahar because that reduces the cooldown further every time you spend Fury. This skill normally has a reduction based on Fury, but the Lahar rune makes the reduction even stronger on the cooldown. Earthquake, Mountain's Call, this is used because it gets rid of the Fury cost. So that leaves you more Fury to go into Ancient Spear, Boulder Toss. And Warcry, of course, we're going to be using a Fury generating rune on that charge. Now for our passive skills, I'm going to start over here with Earth and Might. This is an important one, also a new one for Reaper of Souls. Gives you 30 Fury when activating Avalanche or Earthquake. So you can probably see where the synergy is here with the action skills. We got Avalanche with Lahar, which means you're going to be using Avalanche very frequently, and that gives us a lot of Fury. And then because we took the Mountain's Call on Earthquake, we don't expend any Fury when using that skill. Animosity increases Fury generation by 10% and maximum Fury by 20%. So it allows us to do even more damage when we're at maximum Fury. Berserker Rage, again, 25% additional damage while at maximum Fury. Works perfectly because we don't want to toss a boulder until we get to maximum Fury anyway. And finally, Bloodthirst. This is our only defensive passive. But because we're going to be going through Fury, we're going to be building and spending Fury a lot with this build. It's a really good one. You throw a boulder toss, and as you'll probably see here in a sec when I actually play the game a little bit for you, you can get about a fifth, a quarter of your life back on one boulder toss. So that's a really nice passive defensive skill to have. So to give you an example of how the build plays, I'll just jump into a random area here. Go to the Fields of Misery. And so over here we've got some bad guys. So since I don't have any Fury generated, I'm going to go ahead and hit my Battle Cry. Alright, so I got my Battle Cry. Got some guys around here, so I'll hit the Avalanche, and I'm already at my max. And there we go. So still some bad guys left, so I can hit my defensive ability to build some Fury back up. And again, Boulder Toss to do a bunch of damage. And as you can see, we've already got Avalanche back because of the Fury we spent. Again, grab a few more weapons, and once again, that Boulder Toss charges back already. So you kind of get the picture. You're just spending a lot of Fury and generating a lot of Fury. And been using that to make Boulder Toss both very powerful and very easy to use frequently. So I'm going to just go ahead and port back to town here and talk a little bit more about advantages and disadvantages with this build. The main advantage is you have really bursty damage. So that means you have a lot of versatility in how you approach the enemies because you don't have to be directly engaging them a whole lot to build your Fury or to attack. You know, you do get some Fury from Weapon Toss, but that's not necessarily your main Fury builder. You can just run around and wait for your cooldown to refresh on Charge and on Avalanche and still build Fury frequently enough to keep up an assault. That's great if you run into some, let's say, Fire Chain Arcane Elites, you know, and you're having a hard time going face-to-face with them. You don't have to go face-to-face with this build. And again, as mentioned, with so many bosses having attacks that are hard to dodge at melee range, this build is really good for dealing with that. And it does really good damage when you hit those crits with boulders. I don't have a lot of DPS, okay? I'm not, you know, poop snocking it. I'm not kitted out. I've been playing this game since release, but only a few hours a day. I've got under 200k DPS, okay? And I'm critting, you know, for over 10 million damage. And I can do that pretty frequently. The only real downside with this build is that it's not the best for dealing with lots of packs of little guys. The AoE on Boulder Toss is pretty small, so you'll wipe out some guys, but there'll still be some others left. Now, they don't really pose a danger to you, generally speaking, but they'll be there, they'll be annoying you, and if you happen to have all your skills off of cooldown, you don't really have any way of responding to them effectively. You know, getting them with your weapon toss is going to take forever. So that's really the only downside. It's not a fatal one, though. Like I said, those minor enemies are not going to be much of an issue for you anyway. Now, to wrap it up, I just want to talk about equipment real quick, because it just so happened I was already using this build, but I just so happened to get pretty much the perfect weapon for it. And this is something you're going to want to keep an eye out for, both for this weapon and for things that provide similar benefits. This is the 300 Spear, and so what do we got here? Well, we got increased weapon throw damage by 48%, increased ancient spear damage by 42%. Yeah, that's pretty much the perfect weapon for this build. But if you don't have the 300 Spear, you know, you probably have to look for a little while since you don't have any control over what legendary you get. You still can get these sort of benefits off of other equipment. It's not that hard to roll rares that have weapon throw and ancient spear extra damage. You know, I got some actually on some of my other equipment. Yeah. You know, so you could roll ancient spear bonus damage on a couple of rares and get a bonus damage pretty close to this legendary weapon. Of course, it's not going to be as good if you have the legendary and the rares, but it'll get you by in the meantime. As far as other stats go, obviously strength's always the one you want to look for DPS wise. But I would recommend critical chance and critical damage because you know you're not doing a lot with your primary attack on this build. You're not going face to face a lot, so the attack speed benefits not really so important. You really are looking more for the big burst damage, and that's what critical chance and critical damage is going to help you with. Also, something else to look out for is if you can get a little bit of movement speed increase, and if you can get anything that is going to increase your ability to stay away from effects that would hinder your movement, that's also really good for this build. So basically, like I said, this is the destroy the bosses, and it's a really easy build to play. You just have to watch your cooldowns, and that's pretty much it. It's fairly survivable, and probably best of all, it actually does scale pretty well with the equipment you have. I'm kitted out with exactly what I would want for this build right now, which means I can do more damage than my sheet DPS would suggest, But I was using this build before that, and it still worked just fine. Killed enemies quickly, and more importantly, allowed me to kill enemies quickly without putting myself into a lot of danger. So that's it for the Boulderlanche. Please share this video and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Thanks.